Welcome to On Emergence, a podcast on what it takes to be a human being. Here, we talk about the continuous process of becoming, emerging as human beings to help you live and understand this multifaceted experience of being a human, its challenges, its joys, and its quirks. I'm Laura Sagan, your host and a fellow human being. Today, I am talking about the topic of trust. Especially trusting others. This topic has been emerging in multiple conversations as of late. There is this kind of expectations of the other. Can I trust you? Can I trust the situation? And in that, there is a process of giving up the agency over the situation when we tend to place the trust on the other. So I started with the deep end. So let's maybe start with the definition. Definition of trust is, according to Oxford English Dictionary, is that it is belief that somebody or something is good, sincere, honest, and will not try to harm or trick you. The verb to trust means to have confidence in somebody, to believe that somebody is good, sincere, and honest. What I find interesting in these definitions is that there is an implication, an implicit narrative that trust is only possible when responsibility of not breaking it lies with the other. So whether it is the other person or whether it is a situation, but it never really shines the light back on you. And the challenge with the situation is that you're always placing the trust into the hands of the other. A lot of the times in my conversation, it comes up that, well, can I trust her? Or can I trust him? Or can I trust this? Really, what we're trying to say, do I trust myself if this person hurts me? Or do I trust myself if this situation goes wrong? Can I rely on myself to handle my feelings of pain, discomfort, or any other uncomfortable feelings you might have? I want to invite you to this notion of trusting yourself first and foremost. And I don't mean the type of trust that children have. Type of trust that children have is more of a naivete. So they didn't have their trust tested. And once they learn that certain situations can hurt them, they start trusting less, or their naivete slowly disappears and they start mistrusting the external world, expecting the pain, and therefore internally build up the stories that then, as adults, we spend hours in therapy unpeeling. So there is a difference between informed trust and experience-based trust, and the type of trust that comes from just not having had experience. An informed trust is a lot stronger in its definition rather than naivete, even though naivete is more of an open-hearted, open-minded approach to a situation. And that's actually something that you can cultivate, you can go back to by looking at what is it that prevented you to develop this kind of mistrust towards the external world in the first place. It's possible to start trusting yourself so you can start and you can begin trusting others. When it comes to trust, there is often an expectation that I can trust you to handle my heart, or I can trust this diet plan to keep me in check, or I can trust my boss to handle my career. So there is a multiple of definitions that I trust my family to not betray me, whatever the definition of betrayal is for you. But there is always this handing over the responsibility over your pain or discomfort when it comes to trusting others. But the thing is, you can only trust the others to the extent that you can trust yourself. And this is something that I'm going to repeat quite a lot because it's a very important point. And I really want you to, by the end of this episode, really remember it, really that you can only trust others up until the extent that you trust yourself. If we don't trust the external world, we're constantly feeling in fear. And that actually causes our internal body really tense up. It causes internal tension, increased blood pressure. There's multitude of health consequences coming from that constant perpetual state of vigilance, that you have to be on the lookout that others will not hurt you. And that what happens here is that your brain is constantly engaged in evaluating, continuously assessing the situations around you, both social and physical. And social situations are actually a lot more harder to monitor than the physical ones. In physical, there's like a static circumstances around you, whereas social dynamics, it can be a lot more challenging. So how can you be really open and seeing the other person if you constantly have this narrative that the other person will hurt you and therefore you will be in pain and therefore your body needs to protect itself, that you need to be careful? And what is careful means? It means that maybe you're not interacting with new people with an open heart or an open mind. Maybe when you are interacting with people, you're not really open to the newness of them, to the novelty of meeting someone new, whether it's at work or whether it's in romantic context. It means that your narrative is constantly fogged and clouded by the existing fears based on the fact that you don't trust yourself to handle the situation in case the situation goes wrong. So when you cannot trust the external world, i.e., you cannot trust yourself to handle the implications of external world, your brain is constantly thinking. And it becomes challenging, especially if you are involved in some sort of creative work, because your brain needs to be in the state of flow in order to allow the space for something, for creativity to emerge. And if your brain is constantly assessing and reevaluating what things can go wrong, your brain cannot pursue those creative activities. So these are some of the brief examples of what does it mean not to trust yourself. And of course, there are other examples available, like you're not really dating the person that you want to be dating because you're scared that the person that you really want to date is going to break your heart, because that's challenging, it's fearful, you might get hurt. It could be that you're not working on this next creative project that you've been thinking about starting is because you don't trust yourself that a potential failure in this project is not going to quote unquote destroy you. So these are some of the implications of what does it mean and how does it feel like not to trust the external world. And I invite you to have a little think right now as to what areas of your life that you're not really trusting yourself with. So it could also be your nutrition, for example, that you're not really trusting your eating habits to maintain a healthy weight. Therefore, you need to always constantly refer to your strict diet plan, that you're not trusting your body to be in the moment, to feel into the situation, okay, this is what I'm hungry for. For example, you're not trusting yourself when you pick up the new exercise plan. And when you're not trusting yourself, you subconsciously trying to prove your subconscious right and pick the situations that will prove itself right. So if you're not trusting yourself that you can become the fittest version of yourself, you will subconsciously sabotage yourself. And maybe it's going to take you a month to do it, maybe 6 months, maybe a year's time. But if you don't cultivate that sense of trust within yourself, eventually you're going to sabotage yourself. Now that we talked about potential implications of living without trust, let's talk about, well, what can you actually do to cultivate that feeling of trust in yourself, even though our trust has been broken in the past before. Much like when you exercise in the gym, trust is a muscle and it's something that you can cultivate yourself. One of the best ways that I found that really helps people, especially when a friend is calling or even when I'm handling the situations myself, when I'm fearful, when I'm not really trusting that I will be okay when I'm faced with something new, is positive examples. Our brain is exceptionally good at giving us specific negative examples of how things might go wrong when we're about to go and do something challenging. And examples like this, if you're giving a presentation at work, your brain is giving you amazing examples of how the technology might give up, so you end up having multiple backups. It's good to have backups, however, don't overthink that. There are other examples that your brain might give you, is like, oh, you might choke, or you might say something stupid, you might be laughed at, and it's really good at picturing and giving you very specific examples. However, when we look at the situations where our trust in ourselves might be impeded by the potential negative outcome, it really helps to give specific positive examples of how you handle the situation in the past. And that will open yourself up a little bit more to this experience, to this new experience. You've given presentations before. And even if you haven't given presentations on this scale before, you can always bring an example of a smaller presentation that you gave and it went well, or at least it didn't go awful. So in answer to this negative narratives of how things can go wrong, you can give yourself an example of a positive outcome of a similar situation. An example in relationship would be is that if you're contemplating of entering a relationship with someone and you feel that you cannot trust yourself with them, that you might, whatever the narrative is, that you will get hurt. Chances are you will, first of all, chances are you will get hurt in a relationship, relationships that work like that, but trusting that you will be okay as a result of that pain. And the evidence for that is right here in front of you. You wouldn't be listening to this if you wouldn't have survived that past nasty situation in a relationship that you had before, or any other difficult situation in your life. So remind yourself that you survived 100% of all negative situations in your life. You survived 100% of your saddest and toughest days. You can trust yourself to survive. You can trust yourself to survive the pain. It may not be comfortable. It may not be the best thing that happened to you, not at the moment at least, but you survived it. And that's how you soothe your brain. And by soothing your brain, you're inviting yourself to go into more open situations where your sense of trust can develop even further. That's another point, is that the more you enter into new situations where you originally didn't quite trust yourself if you can handle it, the more you take on those challenges and those risks and enter in this growth process of emerging and becoming, the more you start cultivating that trust in yourself, the bigger the bank of your positive examples become. Now, another point of how to cultivate that sense of trust is acknowledge your fears. Your fears are valid. Your fears are real. They're affecting your behavior, and your behavior can manifest itself into a physical result. Acknowledging your fears means that they're out in the open. They're no longer on the back of your mind. What I personally find really helpful is journaling my fears. So I did a whole episode on journal, so check it out. But journaling your fears, writing them out, allows you to look at them, to kind of take them out from your subconscious and look at them closely. And by taking them out of your subconscious from the back of your mind, it means that your fears are no longer trying to scream over your thoughts of saying, this is what might go wrong, or this how you might get hurt in the end. What really happens here is that you're giving those fears space, and you also take them out from your head. One of the beautiful examples that come to mind, if you watched or read, preferably, Harry Potter books when you were a child or as an adult, maybe you remember a moment where Dumbledore had this ball of thoughts in front of him, where he would take his thoughts from his head with his wand and place it in a bowl. And by placing it in a bowl, he then was able to dive into this bowl of thought and assess it from a third-person perspective. It's a really beautiful example of how just taking the thoughts out of your mind and placing it on a piece of paper really opens up the space in your mind for something new, for maybe a little bit more creativity, a little bit more risk-taking behaviors in your mind to emerge. The issue here is that if you don't acknowledge them, your fears will remain unheard. And fears are normally coming from our childhood experiences. And as children, what do we do when we feel unheard? We start pulling at our mother's or father's hem and say, mommy, daddy, mommy, mommy, and then we start screaming when we don't feel heard. And that's what happens with your fears as well. If you don't acknowledge them, if you don't give them room to breathe and say, hey, I'm here, I'm listening, your fears will just start screaming louder in your ear. And you certainly are not going to end up developing a sense of trust in a room full of screaming kids, and the kids being each of your fears that are telling you what might go wrong in this situation. Because if you ignore it without acknowledging them, that's exactly what can happen. Now, as we're on the topic of talking to your fears as if they were children, it is an entire mindset of looking at yourself. There is a part of you that is trusting, that is open, that has this naivety of wanting to trust the external world. And there's another part of you that is a child that has been hurt in the past before. He or she remembers what it feels like. So it has this protector role over the child that is open. These are all the parts of you. So if you relate to them as your parts, then you can be the adult that can be there for them, for those children, if things so-called go wrong. So I know that I mentioned the part work, and this is extensively covered in IFS System, a book that I recently was recommended by my therapist, by Richard Schwartz, called You're the One You Were Waiting For. And it's a beautiful book. It talks about our parts in the context of relationships. But generally, this parts work, when it comes to trust, really, what you're trying to cultivate is the sense of self that looks at those parts that are not trusting the situation, because our base level is to actually trust. If we go back to how we were as children, is that we were trusting, we were open to new experiences. Everything was a miracle. We'd look at the tree and be like, oh, that's amazing. And then the branch would fall. And then we're like, oh my God, I'm scared of trees. And that goes the narrative. So the base level of our existence is actually trust, is that we're inherently trusting beings. It is our conditioning that makes us feel otherwise. It is the past situations that kind of destroy that sense of trust in others, i.e. in ourselves. And that break of trust in yourself happens when you abandon yourself in the situations that are painful. So, for example, if you got hurt in a relationship, and instead of really being there for yourself, holding your hand in a way that is soothing, that is comforting, as if you were treating a child, for example, reaching out to a therapy or sharing with a friend, or just sitting with the feeling of pain and discomfort and the heartbreak, instead, you resorted to some of the numbing practices, whether you dove right into work to just numb that feelings away, or you ended up numbing yourself in other ways, in a bottle of wine or taking drugs or partying extensively, is that you abandoned yourself in the way that you didn't pay attention, you didn't really sit and gave those feelings space. Because it's very scary when we don't have those tools to be with the pain and discomfort. We don't trust ourselves that we can be with those feelings should a situation arise when those feelings will emerge again. I know this is a complex thought, so I'm going to break it down a little bit more. When you develop a set of tools of how to deal with a situation that is potentially painful, harmful, risky, might lead to a failure, when we don't have that toolbox, we cannot really trust ourselves to be in a situation where those tools might be needed. And I already shared in an episode of meditation as one of the tools that I use to be able to just sit with the feelings, whatever is arising, and how you can fall in love with it too. There's a tool, of course, psychotherapy. I'm a big proponent to that. And there's another tool that is available to you, and that is movement of your body. What happens in the situations when our trust is challenged and when we don't trust something is, like I mentioned, our body gets tensed up. And that tension is a physical reaction. That physical reaction sends to our brain that it needs to be vigilant. And then our brain further increases the tension of our body, which is why it is so helpful to engage in more of a relaxation practices where you relax the internal muscles. So going for a massage as well. So that really relieves the tension stored in your body. You can engage in exercise like stretching or yoga, especially yin yoga, that really allows you to breathe and relax into it. So pumping the weights in the gym, absolutely go for it. It's building the strength, it's building the resilience. I'm a big proponent of exercise. But make sure that you engage also in sufficient relaxation and stretching practices so your muscles have the time and the space to really relax. So either going for a deep tissue massage or engaging in yin yoga or other yoga practices where you really stretch your body and be in flow. Because that constant tension that comes from building the muscles really needs to be released, especially if you're confronted with a situation where your trust might be challenged. So you want to get rid of the tension because you need to be able to listen to your fears rather than being completely overwhelmed by them. Where the body is completely tensed is that all our brain can think about is that tension. It's a response to tension. So this starts feeding that internal loop. If you are in a situation where you feel like you cannot trust, one of the things to do is to engage yourself in a movement practice where your body can move freely. One of my friends who I actually interviewed on this podcast, Stephanie Kittel, she talks about the need to move your body. You can check out her work and the episode. I'm going to link the episode in the description. What we really talked about is how your body has this wisdom and how your body is a tool to handle hardships in life. And when you're dealing with a situation where your trust is potentially compromised, in order to deal with the tension, you can also move in dance. You can go to ecstatic dance, or you can switch on, come up with a playlist that really resonates. It doesn't matter what style of music that you're listening to, but something that moves your body, the music that moves your body, and allow your body to move. Allow this emotion, that tension to move, so you can go back to your base level, which is trusting, which is openness of the heart. It's one of the beautiful takeaways from cultivating that sense of trust, personally for me, is that I started doing a lot more new things. I began taking steps in my life that feel challenging because I have access to that toolbox that I developed, and I share about those tools extensively on this podcast. It became a lot easier for me to be present with people and really seeing them for who they are, exactly how they are, rather than the narrative of fear. So this person is going to hurt me and I'm not going to be okay. This practice becomes easier with time, but this practice is much like when you go into the gym. It is a muscle that you need to exercise. Sometimes it's really increasing the strength of the muscle, so it is giving specific examples of positive outcome where you were okay, so you can trust someone, or engaging in practices where you unpeel the layers of what stands in the way for that basic inherent trust that you have. So practices like movement of your body, practices like listening to your fears and what they have to say. Now, I wanted to mention the difference between your gut feeling and your fears. Fears are based in past experiences. So the fear is going to give you exactly specific examples of that person, what they did in the past and how they're going to do it wrong again, how they're going to hurt you again, or how a similar situation has occurred in the past and how you weren't able to handle it. It becomes really loud in your head when your fears get involved. So in that situation, journaling can really be helpful. On the other hand, when your gut feeling is involved, it really is in the name. It is, you kind of start feeling it in your body. Most of the time, it would be in your gut, it would be around your stomach area or in your torso, or you could notice it as a tension in your body. So it really helps when you're feeling that something is off, just adjusting your body a little bit, straightening your back, rolling back your shoulders, and then just tuning into that feeling. See what emerges. And what can emerge is a visual. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a verbal cue. It doesn't need to be a coherent sentence or a word or a color. So listen to that. That is how you cultivate that feeling of trust and feeling of intuition. And that's how you learn how to listen to your gut feeling. When I thought about talking about this topic, really it came out more as a wish that you begin to trust yourself more. Because when you trust yourself, the world becomes really beautiful. You kind of start looking at the world around you with this childlike enthusiasm, with an open heart, and you begin expect good things to happen. And chances are good things will start happening a lot more. So that is my wish for you. So you can trust yourself a little bit more, so you can trust others and the external world a little bit more, with a little bit more of open heart. I wanted to mention that I'm also working on a series on feelings. So educating how can you look and experience different feelings that arise, and how to cultivate that sense of distance with your feelings. You're not your feelings. You're not emotions. You're the one who is experiencing them. So we're going to look at things like sadness, at anger, at joy, and explore this topic a little bit deeper. Now, one last thing to mention is if you want to suggest specific topics, if you want to share your thoughts and feedbacks and feelings, those are very, very welcome. Please feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. The handle is On Emergence, or you can subscribe to the YouTube channel On Emergence, same handle. And every episode actually has a backstory that you can read about on the website. And the website is onemergence.com. It was a pleasure to share on trust with you today. Once again, I'm Laura Sagan, your host and a fellow human being.